Hello Raptors fans, and welcome to another episode of Raptors Report. Today we're going to be looking at where the Raptors stand in the Eastern Conference, as well as looking at some of the needs the Raptors should be looking to address on the trade market. Let's jump in. The season to date has not been too pretty. While the Raptors are hovering around 500, and there have been some bleak periods where things looked quite bad, and the rumblings of the tank brigade could be heard over the hills and getting louder. But I'm here to say that things aren't quite so bad as they once appeared, and I think there's an opportunity to salvage a season that is heading south. But doing so, in my opinion, will require the Raptors to make a move or two, sooner rather than later. There are two areas I think the Raptors need to shore up before they can win games with any consistency. The starting lineup, for the most part, has been good, even great at times, with big contributions coming from Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and OG Anunoby. The bench has been a huge area of concern, however. That's why I think grabbing a solid backup guard that can run the offense when Fred sits is priority number one. Priority number two should be trying to get a center, either backup or starting caliber, that can contribute on both ends of the floor. Khem Birch's return date is still very much up in the air, and Precious, while he's still young and also a great defender, contributes next to nothing on offense. That should be the second addition the Raptors should look to make. First off, let's talk backup guards, because reducing the amount of minutes on Fred VanVleet should be a priority, both in terms of keeping him fresh for this season, as well as limiting injury potential, which could happen if he continues to play almost 40 minutes per game. The first guy I think that the Raptors should look at is Tomas Satoransky. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that he's been good this season, because he hasn't been. He's been downright stinky. He's scoring under 3 points per game on atrocious percentages. In order to understand why I'm suggesting picking him up requires a slightly longer memory. If you watched the Olympic qualifying tournament this summer, Satoransky, along with some guy named Blake Schilb, eliminated Team Canada from the Olympics, with Satoransky hitting the game-clinching shot. In the NBA prior to this season, Satoransky has been a dependable bench guard who can do a little bit of everything. Because he's been so terrible this season and is on the final year of his contract, the Raptors could probably acquire him without having to give up much of anything. Satoransky is an expiring contract worth around $10 million this season, meaning that the Raptors would not have to think about him beyond this season. He'd simply be a buy low guy that they could give a shot for not much invested. The Raptors, in my proposed trade, would give away Bonga, Boucher, and the rights to Nando De Colo, plus cash to the Pelicans for Satoransky. Boucher is someone I had high hopes for this season, but his play so far has been extremely lackluster. While this trade would technically work with only Boucher outgoing, I'm operating under the assumption that the Raptors would not want to go into the tax in order to acquire a backup point guard, so outgo Isaac Bonga as well as Nando De Colo's qualifying offer. If Satoransky actually pulls out of his career nosedive, he'd probably be a decent pairing with Fred VanVleet, as he could run the point with him off the court and play alongside him for spurts due to his height. As for the likelihood that that happens, I actually think it's pretty good. Satoransky is only 30 and has 4 seasons worth of data that suggests he's a solid backup guard that is simply having an unfortunate start to the season on one of the worst teams in the league. The next trade I think the Raptors should explore is for Kemba Walker. What? Kemba Walker? The guy with the enormous contract? Well, I don't blame you for thinking that Kemba Walker is still one of the highest paid players in the league, and he still is, kinda. For those of you who perhaps didn't pay rapt attention to this past offseason, Kemba was bought out of his $26 million per year contract by the Thunder, and the Knicks signed him for around $9 million a season over 2 years. As he's fallen out of the Knicks rotation, technically he's getting paid by 2 teams simultaneously to sit on the bench, which, you know, good for him. He's making bank. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that Kemba Walker has turned the corner and become a fantastic player at the age of 31. He's still a big liability on defense, and he's fallen out of the Knicks rotation because they simply cannot afford to play both him, Fournier, Randall, and other poor defenders on the court at the same time without conceding approximately 1,000,000 points to the opposing team. Kemba still has gas left in the tank on offense though, and as we've seen from him, he can both hit shots as well as make plays and distribute, even this season. Acquiring Kemba would have to be put into the perspective of someone who can run the offense while Fred is off the floor, which I'm confident Kemba can still do at a pretty high level. You hope that the good on offense more or less makes up for the bad on defense. The trade I propose is Kemba Walker for Chris Boucher and Isaac Bonga. This deal, while I think it could help the Raptors considerably, carries with it some risk. Kemba is paid for one more season after this one, which is not too scary, but it should be weighed in when considering this trade. The second risk is that he, like Goran Dragic before him, could simply be too much of a defensive liability and Nick Nurse just won't play the guy. For the Knicks, this gives them an opportunity to walk away from the contract they gave to a guy they no longer want to allocate minutes to, for some expirings and a player they could perhaps see value in Chris Boucher. The Raptors get a veteran point guard that can run the team in order to give Fred a much-needed rest. Next, let's look at some options at center. The first is probably the most exciting and has been doing the rounds on Twitter ever since Shams Charania said that the Pacers are looking to blow the team up, which is wise considering they're not very good. The hubbub is that either Miles Turner or Domantas Sabonis is on the outs, and I think that the Raptors should kick the tires on Miles Turner. Ever since losing Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka, the Raptors have been missing a center that could guard the basket as well as stretch the floor. Miles Turner can do both of those things, as he is a pretty consistent three-point shooter, as well as one of the best rim protectors in the league. For those of you who are fed up with the switch-happy defense that the Raptors currently employ, you'd probably be pretty happy with acquiring Turner, as he's an elite drop defender, and the chances that you want to run a system where you have him switching out onto a guard every time down the floor is very low. The Raptors would probably run a drop defense scheme where you have Turner waiting in the paint to deter layup attempts. While obviously the Raptors would have to abandon the ambitious defensive scheme they've been working towards for something more conventional, I think that acquiring a defender of Turner's caliber would make that a pretty intriguing proposition. On offense, traditional centers tend to clog things up, as the defending team can more easily send help on defense when an offensive player drives to the basket. Turner's ability to hit the three-point shot should not only help with isolation possessions by pulling a defender out of the paint, it would also give the Raptors another option in pick and rolls, with Turner being able to execute pick and pops with Fred, OG, Siakam, or even Scottie in the future. Turner is also only 25, so he'd probably fit the timeline if the goal is to compete with the core of players they have right now. Okay, so the fit is there. Are there any trades that make sense? The most sensible trade to me would be to swap Gary Trent Jr. plus pick equity for Miles Turner. The problem with that is that Gary can't be traded until January 15th due to the way his contract works. The next would be to package Goran Dragic's expiring contract along with someone like Dalano Banton and a first-round pick. Whenever you assess these trades, it's always difficult to peg where a player's value is, especially when the deal is between someone looking to give up the win-now piece for future assets. I am a big fan of Dalano Banton, but the Pacers may not be. Another team might also outbid the Raptors, someone like, say, Golden State with James Wiseman plus extras. But I think that in terms of a cure for what ails the Raptors, Turner is near the top of the list of players available. Next, we'll look at the budget option. There's been an intriguing report that the Raptors have been active on the trade front in Minnesota, and there's a guy that I think would suit the Raptors very well that is currently playing for the Timberwolves. Karl Anthony Towns. That's not it. Oh right, Naz Reid. Naz Reid is a 22-year-old center with a skill set that I think the Raptors would be interested in. Reid is a big guy, standing at 6'10", and on the defensive end plays like a traditional center. He contests shots at the rim, boxes out, and puts his body on people, perhaps a bit too often as he has a very high foul rate. Like Turner, the offensive side of the ball is where I think Naz makes the most sense for the Raptors. Naz, like Turner, is a stretch 5, shooting 37% on 3-point shots on good volume. The same points apply here too. Reed would open the paint up for Siakam to attack inside on ISOs, and give Fred a pick-and-pop partner, which the team currently lacks. So why would the Timberwolves be willing to part with Naz Reid? The Timberwolves thus far in Reed's career have been reluctant to pair him alongside Karl Anthony Towns, and it makes sense. The days of running two slower foot-speed centers together on defense is over, and asking either to guard perimeter forwards is asking for trouble. As a result, Reed plays a limited amount of minutes, with only a couple being shared with Towns. My proposed trade is Boucher, Malachi Flynn, and a 2023 second-round pick for Naz Reid and Jake Layman. Layman would be added for salary purposes, and his deal expires at the end of the season. Boucher would be an interesting addition to the Timberwolves roster, as he has the foot speed to guard forwards on the perimeter, and theoretically, if he could return to his form last season, stretch the floor for the Timberwolves, which would make him a much better pairing alongside Towns. On top of that, you might notice that the current coach of the Timberwolves, Chris Finch, was the Raptors' assistant coach last season when Boucher was shooting the lights out, so perhaps there could be some interest on that front. Malachi Flynn has been given some rope this season, but has not been the player Raptors fans envisioned when he won Rookie of the Month last year. The Timberwolves could potentially view him as a reclamation project on a cheap deal. The second-round pick is to sweeten things, as I think the players being swapped alone are a little unbalanced in the Raptors' favor. I don't think stardom is in Naz Reid's future, but I do think the fit is great, and he could be a good young role player that would not break the bank for the Raptors to acquire. And that's this week's episode. Naturally, I'm eager to hear what you think about the Raptors' needs. Are backup guard and center the two biggest needs, or is there something else more important you think the Raptors should address? Do you think the trades I proposed are too friendly to the Raptors or too harsh? I'm always eager to hear what you have to say in the comments here on YouTube or on Twitter, where you can find me at Raps Report. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, as it helps the channel grow. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.